Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to a most special gathering of the Living Earth Movement. We're going to have a special presentation today from John Cobb and Reverend Bonnie Tarwater on the Earth Crisis Support Groups. We'll hear first from Dr. John Cobb. John.
Hi. Well, I'm glad to greet everybody. This is not an idea that occurred to me, but when Bonnie mentioned it a few weeks ago, as having come out of some conversation she'd had, I said, if we really succeeded in doing that, that would make our whole lives worthwhile. It could be very important. So, Bonnie, I'm turning this over to you. I think most of you know Bonnie. She's a pastor and a psychological counselor, and the pastor of the church that she's a pastor of includes goats and ducks and chickens, sometimes rabbits. We worship with the animals, and I think that's an example of her imaginative and not only being imaginative, but acting on creative imagination. So, Bonnie, I think you have a very important proposal to make, and I look forward to hearing it.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Charles and Richard and everyone for coming, and it's wonderful to be with you. I want to just begin with a question, and that is, if you will raise your hand if you feel that you have plenty of love and support to deal with your fear, your anxiety, your despair, your grief about our Earth crisis. You have enough, Walt? Okay, I feel that I don't have enough, and I'm guessing that most of us don't feel we have enough love and support to deal with something that's so incredibly existentially painful and difficult to imagine. And I think we can just begin by remembering Margaret Mead's words. Don't think a small group of people cannot change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And it has been my experience, both as a pastor and as a counselor, as a grandmother and wife and mother and just global citizen, that we are witnessing a time when the power of the family as a unit has truly been compromised, and people don't have as much love and support from their families that they need. Now, there are all kinds of small groups that get together to deal with many different kinds of problems, but we don't know of any that deal with the Earth crisis. And John Cobb and wrote this wonderful book that's going to be coming out next year, Confessions of a Disciple of Jesus. And we have been talking about how we could create a program or a book that would be helpful for people of faith. And then I think it really became clear to me that as a Christian, but as a Unitarian Universalist, a very interfaith pastor, I really feel called at this time to create small groups where everyone is welcome, whether they're Hindus or Muslims or atheists, whether they are spiritual but not religious. And John has taught many of us this in the course of his working on as an environmentalist and a philosopher, as a theologian. He has modeled what it means to work with people at many different kinds of people, many secular people, non-religious people, as well as religious people. So it's time for us to do this, to gather together with people, regardless of what we might have in common or what we don't have in common. For this is what people have been doing in support groups for millennia. Yes, they've been gathering together with people to share their feelings, and they are committed to getting together regularly to love and support one another. So yes, this is kind of like a family, and many families, what do? They eat together, don't they? And we're inviting people to both share their feelings as well as share their feelings about what's happening in our world, and then to actually have a meal together. Now, there's wonderful programs, models for this. There's 12-step programs, for example. I'm what you call a 12-stepper myself. I have benefited from attending and being parts of many different 12-step groups. And it's very effective if people do this one thing, this miraculous thing, tell the truth. Okay. And if we come together and we share a common circumstance that we have, that we share together, a common challenge, and we tell the truth about what's going on with us, amazing kinds of transformations happen both individually and collectively. But it's this collective small group, because so many people have talked about different kinds of spiritual practices, but I want to lift up in the Earth Crisis Support Groups the most important spiritual practice of all that I think most religions agree with, and that is loving relationships. When we can give and receive love in loving relationships, this is a profound spiritual practice. Now, there are many different kinds of small support groups that have done tremendous amounts of changing for individuals and for entire communities. Take the base communities, for example, in Latin America. They had revolutionary changes both for individuals and for groups. We have many psychological and medical groups now. Yes, if somebody has, for example, a woman has breast cancer, she will very often be invited to become a part of a small breast cancer support group. And what do they do in that group? They all are sharing a common challenge, and they all commit to trying to tell the truth about their experience and what they're going through. And they have an enormous bonding, okay, that they experience, and they become loving communities. Now, some people in a breast cancer support group might die within a few months, and some may retain these relationships and end up going into remission and having their cancer cured, and they have benefited from the program as well. And regardless of what happens to all of us in this planetary catastrophe that we're living in, we will all benefit for closer, more loving, supportive relationships. Now, another model that's very, very dear to me is the early church. Because if those of you who know about the history of Christianity, this is exactly how the early church began. Okay, and it was Jesus, who was a Jew, who did the work and invited others to do the work of being hosts and hostesses, not to just other Jews or then what became Christians, but to all people who were in need. And that is exactly what these Earth Crisis Support Groups intend to do. So they shared a meal in the early church. They had this profound trauma that they all survived together with the crucifixion of Jesus. And they began to meet in people's homes. Often we know that they were many women who were leaders of this church. And we know women historically have often been leaders in showing hospitality and warmth and providing an invitation, a safe place for people to gather in their feeling and their families, in their communities, in their religious communities. And we are called, I think, men and women today, to do that same kind of invitation where we share and we are the truth about what's really going on in the world, and we share about what's really going on with us personally, and then we share a meal together. Because there are two kinds of mountains that I think that these Earth Crisis Support Groups plan to invite us to climb. One is this big mountain of sharing our feelings. And if you are like me and did not grow up in a family that shared their feelings, I want to just assure you that there's many of us who've come to this very late in life. And what I have discovered is that when I'm around other people who are bravely sharing how they're feeling or sharing about what's going on in the world, it's like a contagion, and it becomes easier for me to do the same. But sharing our feelings is not an end in itself. There's a second mountain we need to climb, and that is telling the truth about what's happening in the world. Now, there's been all kinds of new wonderful research about how people can heal from trauma. And scientists tell us new pathways in our brains can actually be forged. So we have so much potentiality that we are not at all aware of as a human family. And we have no idea how telling the truth about how we're feeling and about what's really happening on the planet, we have no idea what could happen from these groups. Now, every crisis is an invitation to grow. Yes, I'm sure you've experienced this in your life. I know I have. It is an invitation to live our lives differently. And we are much more resilient as a human species than I think most of us are aware of. So whether we die very soon, because none of us know when we're going to die, or if we have a long life ahead of us, regardless of that, we can have more close, loving relationships. So we are inviting you to do something very simple. You can be a leader, or you can ask to join a group. And we hope these are in person. But if you are, where you cannot be because you are quarantined or whatever, we've learned during COVID, we can change our life dramatically, very quickly. And we could have Zoom groups. But ideally, we want you to be with people in person, maybe 6 to 8 people. It could be just you and 2 other people. It doesn't really matter at this point. But we invite you for 2023 to give yourself and your friends and family and neighbors and people in your religious communities this gift, this as a New Year's gift. Make the invitation for people to come. We have very concise, easy to follow, the very few instructions, blessedly, on how you would run such a group. These are leaderless groups, meaning everybody in the group is charged with being able to name if there's any problems in the group. And we invite people to share truthfully 2 times around, one time around in the circle about themselves and their feelings in their life. The second time around, we invite people to just share about what's happening in the world. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have many relatives or friends, or frankly, even colleagues as a minister, who are able or willing or wanting to talk about the threats, the existential threats. We are living during the 6th extinction of life on Earth, for heaven's sakes. We can't even fathom what that means. We are now listening on the news about these threats of nuclear annihilation. We hear as Americans, not billions, but trillions of dollars, whatever that is, being spent on military. So we are living in a world in which a lot of things just don't make sense, but they're terrifying. And denial, as they say, is not just a river in Egypt. And the reason we use denial is because it works. It's a fantastic kind of coping mechanism. If you go into denial, you don't have to deal with all those feelings that are underneath, but just skin deep. Now, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and many people have shared with us that we need to break our denial in order to have this whole gamut of feelings. Because you're probably like me. You can have in one day a roller coaster of feelings, from shock to anger to grief to despair. And hopefully at some point, only with love and support, we can come to some acceptance. But the good news, the second mountain, is that we can have this meal together after we've shared personally and shared about what's happening in the world. And we can talk about what we might do in the world. Now, this could be something simple, like you might want to read a book, like John Cobb's new book, Confessions of a Disciple of Jesus. It's fantastic. Or it might be a book, like I'm inviting people to have a book on Medea Benjamin, on the war in Ukraine. Or it might be, I don't know what. You might decide you want a letter writing campaign, or you might want to start involving yourself and your group in civil disobedience, or join other organizations that are doing things that you admire and you believe in. The ideas are infinite, but you need the love and support of a small group. You need to meet at least weekly and repeatedly. Now, we know this works. Okay, and someone comes to mind in this Earth crisis, someone who's kind of a young version of John Cobb, someone who has continued, although she knows how devastating the state of affairs is in the world, and she continues to be a self-actualized person doing tremendous things in the world. And that person is Greta Thunberg. I'm sure all of you, like me, admire her tremendously. And she speaks very openly about her autism. Now, autism is an interesting thing because I don't know about you, but I have had the benefit of being very close to many autistic people, and they often just don't have a kind of ability to censor themselves. It can be very refreshing to be around autistic people who are just telling you what they really think. And Greta found out about what was happening in the world. She went into a deep, dark depression as a young teenager, and she had very loving, supportive family. But if you don't have a loving, supportive family, it is not time to give up. This is what the church has taught us, has taught me personally. You get lemons, you make lemonade. There's lots of people that don't have the family, either from death or from addiction or mental illness, or they're not nearby. You need to make a kind of a network, community support group wherever you are. You know, I know this as a minister. When I have ministered to people who are on their deathbeds, and one of the things many people who are dying do not have is people that are close to them that are willing to talk about their impending death. Now, I've always said to people, do you want to talk about your dying? And they often say, yes, thank you for asking, because nobody else in my family and none of my friends, nobody in my church want to talk with me about the fact that I'm dying. So it is my passionate belief that if you give people half a chance to tell the truth, that they will indeed want to share their truth with you. Now, often we may be ashamed, yes? We may be ashamed that we're so overwhelmed and we feel so guilty, you know, we're still polluting, we're still not changing our life, or you're still whatever. You're still working for Lockheed or whatever your tremendous guilt is about what you're doing to contribute to this catastrophe that we are witnessing. Well, we're all guilty. And these small groups are an opportunity for us to love one another. Now, I want you all to just think about, because I used to be a drama teacher and work in the theater. We can act as if we're Greta Thunberg, even if we're not, okay? She had the courage after going through this roller coaster of despair and anger and grief. Then she had the support of a loving family, which you're going to get from your Earth Crisis Support Group, to go out into the world. And she has done tremendous things. You may say, I am not interested. I am overwhelmed. I cannot possibly do things to save the world. I can barely pay my rent. I've got terrible health problems. I've got people that are mentally ill in my family. And I have some good news and bad news. We are all interconnected with every creature on this planet. And you've heard that expression, a butterfly wing in Australia affects the weather everywhere. So whether we like it or not, we are all deeply affected about what's happening in Ukraine, about what's happening to the refugees on the borders, what's happening with the whole ecosystem collapse, the animals that are being so tremendously traumatized and killed, and floods and fires. We're all actually connected. And when we open our hearts, we feel for all of these creatures. But it's so painful, we just shut down. We shut down and go into denial. But the problem with denial is sort of like being in cement. You just stay put in one place. And we're so afraid of our feelings. It turns out, if anybody gives you an invitation to express your feelings, it turns out that they're not nearly as bad as you thought, because they morph into one another. So you might be angry for a while, and then you go into despair, and then you go into shock. It's kind of a revolving kind of invitation. You just don't want to be stuck. The truth sets us free. This is what religion has taught us. 12-step programs, psychological and medical groups all do the same thing. They meet with a small group of people who share the same circumstance, and we are all in this shared circumstance right now. And they tell the truth to one another about what's really going on with them. But again, that's not the end of the story. Then they can share coping mechanisms of what they can do to become more active in the world. So, this potluck is very important. suicide rate is skyrocketing. People's addictions are skyrocketing. We have so many people that are in so much despair. But I'm here to tell you, as someone who has benefited from counseling and benefited from loving relationships, and someone who provides counseling, the talking cure works. It works. That's why we use it. You know, when we talk to people, we can get stuff out and we begin to understand about what we're going through. Now, because we're all guilty and because we've all contributed to this crisis in ways that, you know, we're conscious of and ways that we don't know, we need to be able to have a lack of judgment for others. And one of the things that I think will be really important for these earth crisis support groups is for people, for example, depending on your number, you'll have a timekeeper. People will be invited to share for 5 minutes with no crosstalk. Nobody's saying, oh, but this or that or that. You just get to talk. And that is freeing in and of itself. Okay. But if you have nothing to say, that's okay too. But we're going to just give you that 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, depending on how many people. And we're going to sit and be with you in silence. And this can be more powerful than any words can express. So we can have faith that being together, creating community, committing to loving, supportive relationships with one another is profoundly transformative and healing, and has been the very thing that people throughout history have done. Okay. We can provide you lots of support. I know I speak for John Cobb, and I are very committed to this program, and we will help you join a group. We will help you lead a small group as far as being the person who gets people together. We can open it up to a conversation if you have questions. I'd love to hear from you, what you think of this idea. And let's just open it up and hear what you think. If you'd like one of these in 2023, if you think it would be valuable, and how you feel about this this gift of 2023 that John and I are giving to you. John, I think they've highlighted you. Would you like to say anything?
Well, I already made a very simple statement that I'm not in despair. I have. Is it too late? Well, it's too late for a whole lot of things, but what we do still makes a difference. It can make a huge difference. And I may later on talk a little bit about my experience in talking about and wanting to talk about and wanting to discuss, and how very, very few people have been willing to share. And I think Bonnie understands why there are so few who want to talk about something as desperately important. And when they don't talk about it, when we don't talk about it, in spite of the fact that we know, nevertheless, our actual planning, our actual politics, our actual religion is very little affected by the fact that we may be the last generation. And I can't think of anything more important than getting people to talk about it. I think once people really start talking about it with an intimate group, it will affect the way they vote. It will affect the way they think, the way they plan, the way they act. And that's why I said it could be. I mean, of course, we may fail completely. You know, I'm accustomed to trying things that fail, but that doesn't mean you don't try. And if it works, if we really could get thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to meet in groups of this kind, I think Congress would be a different kind of organization from what it is. So, to a meeting. Most gracious God, you who love all the world and every creature individually, we thank you that you love us, not depend on what we do or think. Help us to love one another, including those who we think of as our enemies. Bless us in our new venture. Help us to be constantly open to your guidance. Amen.